He wants us to be friends, Roy said, understanding Max's message perfectly. Perhaps he is wiser than both our species, Thane replied, reaching down to scratch behind Max's ears. We came to your world seeking refuge, and found teachers instead. You fled seeking safety and lost the very thing that makes life worth living. But it is not too late to fix our mistakes. Roy activated his communication device to contact the refugee fleet. Admiral Ross, this is Captain Bennett. You need to hear this, and you need to prepare the colonies for some very good news. Over the following weeks, the most unusual diplomatic negotiations in galactic history took place. Human representatives met with Corvani leadership in sessions, moderated by dogs who seemed to understand that their two favorite species were trying to work out how to live together. The talks were held in the newly constructed parks of Earth, where the serious business of interspecies cooperation was frequently interrupted by requests for belly rubs and games of fetch. The truth about the Corvani situation emerged slowly. Their empire was indeed vast and militarily powerful, but it was also dying. Generations of warfare had left their culture hollow, their birth rates declining, their people efficient but joyless. They had detected the strange energy signatures coming from Earth, the psychic resonance of millions of creatures capable of unconditional love, and had come seeking whatever was creating that impossible signal. We thought it was a weapon, admitted Admiral Korath, Thane's superior, during one of the sessions. Energy patterns that powerful, broadcast across space, could only be some form of advanced technology. We never imagined it was simply happiness. Dr. Maya Collins, who had joined the diplomatic team, found herself sitting cross-legged on the grass with Charlie, her golden retriever, who had not only survived but thrived under Corvani care. Our dogs created a beacon that could be detected from interstellar distances? Not just detected, Thane explained. Your companions were calling out to the galaxy, broadcasting a signal that said, "Here is how to love without conditions. Here is how to be loyal without slavery. Here is how to be happy." My people heard that call and traveled across space to find its source. Charlie seemed to understand that he was being discussed and wagged his tail with the modest pride of someone who had accomplished something important without quite meaning to. Around them, other dogs lay peacefully beside their human families, many of whom had formed equally strong bonds with the Corvani soldiers who had cared for them. The final agreement was unlike any treaty in human or Corvani history. Earth would become a joint colony, shared equally between both species. The Corvani would provide advanced technology and protection, while humans would share their knowledge of companionship, art, music, and the thousand small things that made life beautiful instead of merely survivable. The dogs, as the architects of this unlikely alliance, would be honored as the galaxy's first interspecies ambassadors. Roy found himself standing in the same spot where he had made his final evacuation from Earth months earlier. But instead of empty landing pads and abandoned pets, he saw human families reuniting with dogs who remembered them perfectly, Corvani warriors learning to play frisbee, and children of both species chasing puppies through gardens that bloomed with flowers from two worlds. Max approached him carrying a stick that was clearly intended as a gift. But instead of the simple piece of wood Roy expected, it was carved with intricate designs that told the story of the past months: humans fleeing, Corvani arriving, dogs teaching, and everyone learning. The carving was signed with paw prints and alien symbols working together. "Did you make this?" Roy asked Thane, who was supervising a group of young Corvani learning to properly throw tennis balls for an enthusiastic pack of retrievers. Max designed it. Private Talk carved it using techniques he learned from your art databases. Scout supervised the historical accuracy. Thane smiled, an expression that looked natural on his scarred features now. "It seems your companions have decided to become historians as well as diplomats." As the sun set over New York City, Roy watched the first joint human Corvani family group settling in for the evening. Children from both species played together while their parents, some scaled and blue, others pink and soft, shared the universal experience of trying to convince overtired youngsters that bedtime was not a punishment. Dogs of every size and breed supervised the proceedings with the patient authority of experienced babysitters. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. Humanity's greatest fear had become their greatest blessing. The aliens they had fled from in terror had turned out to be the friends they had always needed, but never knew how to find. And their dogs, left behind in humanity's darkest hour, had saved not just their own world, but two entire civilizations that had forgotten how to truly live. Max settled beside Roy as the stars came out, his warm weight a reminder of loyalty that transcended species, time, and the vast distances between worlds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as two very different peoples learned to build something unprecedented together. But tonight Roy was content to sit under alien stars with his old friend and the new friends that friend had made, knowing that the greatest invasion in galactic history had been accomplished not with weapons or warfare, but with wagging tails and wet noses and the simple revolutionary act of unconditional love. In the distance, a puppy barked with joy at discovering its first firefly, and both human and Corvani adults rushed to share in the wonder. The future of the galaxy had never looked brighter. The coffee in Dr. Maya Collins's cup had gone cold 3 hours ago, but she hadn't noticed. Her eyes stayed locked on the massive holographic display showing thousands of red dots moving through space toward Earth. Each dot represented an alien ship bigger than anything humans had ever built. The fleet stretched across millions of kilometers, and they were all heading straight for home. Maya rubbed her tired eyes and looked around the emergency command center. World leaders, military officers, and scientists from every nation crowded the room. Everyone spoke in hushed, worried voices. The air smelled of sweat and fear. Outside the reinforced windows, she could see the lights of Geneva twinkling in the early morning darkness, completely unaware that everything was about to change. "How long do we have?" asked General Davis, his weathered face grim under the harsh fluorescent lights. 2 months and 16 days until they reach Earth orbit, Maya replied, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "Maybe less if they speed up." President Walsh leaned forward in her chair, her knuckles white as she gripped the table edge. "Are we absolutely certain they're hostile?" Maya nodded slowly. "Their formation is pure military. No communication attempts. No deviation from course. They're not explorers or diplomats. This is an invasion force." The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of computers and the distant sound of helicopters landing on the roof. More officials arriving for what everyone knew would be humanity's darkest hour. Maya had spent her entire career preparing for first contact with alien life. She had imagined handshakes and peace treaties, not this nightmare of overwhelming force heading their way. "Then we activate Phoenix Protocol," General Davis said quietly. Everyone in the room knew what that meant. Phoenix Protocol was humanity's last resort, a plan so desperate that they had hoped never to use it. Total evacuation of Earth. Every human being transported to the colonies on Mars, Europa, and the outer stations. It was supposed to be impossible, but they had built the infrastructure over decades, hoping they would never need it. "The transport capacity calculations are brutal," said Dr. Williams from the logistics team. "We can move 8 billion people, but that's it. No cargo beyond essential supplies, no personal belongings, and absolutely no non-human life forms." Maya felt her heart sink. "What about the animals?" "Impossible. The mass calculations don't allow for it. Every kilogram matters when you're moving this many people across space. We've run the numbers 1,000 times. Pets, livestock, wildlife, they all stay behind." The weight of that decision hit everyone in the room like a physical blow. Maya thought about her own dog, a golden retriever named Charlie who was probably sleeping peacefully in her apartment right now. Millions of families would have to make the same impossible choice: save themselves or die with their beloved companions. Within 6 hours, the evacuation began. Transport ships that normally carried cargo were converted to passenger vessels. Every space-worthy craft in human space was pressed into service. The colonies that had taken decades to build would have to absorb Earth's entire population in a matter of weeks. Captain Roy Bennett found himself in charge of the North American evacuation zone. He had been a transport pilot for 15 years, moving supplies between Earth and Mars, but nothing had prepared him for this. The staging areas looked like refugee camps from humanity's worst disasters, except these stretched to the horizon. Families lined up with single bags containing everything they could carry. Children cried for pets they had to leave behind. Adults tried to stay strong while their hearts broke. Roy watched a little girl saying goodbye to her cat, promising to come back soon, not understanding that soon might never come. The hardest part was the dogs. They seemed to sense something was wrong, but didn't understand why their families were leaving them. Roy saw golden retrievers, German shepherds, tiny terriers, and massive mastiffs all waiting patiently by the transport gates, tails wagging hopefully, thinking this was some kind of game. "We could fit a few small ones," suggested Lieutenant Peters, Roy's co-pilot, as they watched a family trying to explain to their border collie why he couldn't come. "You know we can't," Roy replied, his voice rough. "Every gram of extra weight means fewer people. We've already had to leave behind medical supplies to make room for everyone." The evacuation continued around the clock. Massive transport ships landed and took off in endless cycles, carrying thousands of people at a time. The logistics were incredible, humanity's greatest achievement and greatest failure happening simultaneously. They were saving their species while abandoning everything that made life worth living. Roy made dozens of trips between Earth and the staging stations in orbit. Each time he returned to Earth, there were fewer people and more abandoned animals. The dogs gathered in packs around the empty evacuation sites, still hoping their families would return. Some had learned to operate the automatic food dispensers left behind. Others shared food with cats and smaller animals, as if they understood. They were all in this together now. On his final trip, Roy's transport was nearly empty, just a handful of stragglers who had refused to leave until the very last moment. As they lifted off from the landing pad in what used to be downtown Chicago, Roy looked down at the city below. Thousands of dogs had gathered in the streets and parks. Some sat patiently like they were waiting for commands that would never come. Others ran in circles playing games with no audience. "Look at them," whispered an elderly passenger, pressing her face to the window. "They don't understand we're never coming back." Roy felt something break inside his chest. In all his years of flying, through meteor storms and equipment failures, he had never felt like a coward, but leaving Earth's dogs behind felt like the greatest betrayal in human history. They had been humanity's companions for thousands of years, loyal through every war and disaster. Now, when it mattered most, people were abandoning them to save themselves. As Earth shrank behind them, Roy made a silent promise. If humanity somehow survived this war, if they ever defeated the alien fleet and returned to Earth, the first thing he would do was find those dogs. All of them. However long it took. But first, they had to stay alive long enough to keep that promise. And with each passing day, the alien fleet drew closer to the world they had fled, leaving behind the most loyal friends humanity had ever known. The first thing Commander Thane noticed about the empty planet was how quiet it was. Not the dead quiet of a world without life, but the strange quiet of a world waiting for something to happen. His massive boots crunched on the fallen leaves as he walked through what the abandoned data files called Central Park in New York City. Behind him, a squad of Corvani warriors spread out in standard formation, their weapons ready, their sensors scanning for threats that never appeared. Thane stood nearly 3 meters tall, his blue-gray skin covered in the ritual scars that marked him as a veteran of 30 campaigns. His people had conquered 17 worlds, each one fighting desperately until the very end. The Corvani expected resistance, battle cries, last stands that would be remembered in songs. Instead, they found empty cities and something completely unexpected. A bark echoed through the trees, followed by another, and then what sounded like an entire pack approaching. Thane raised his plasma rifle, and his squad moved into defensive positions. Through the undergrowth came the strangest sight any of them had ever witnessed in decades of warfare. A German shepherd emerged from behind a tree, tail wagging so hard his entire back end wiggled. He was followed by a golden retriever, a border collie, and what looked like a tiny white furball on 4 legs. None of them showed any fear of the heavily armed aliens. Instead, they approached with the kind of excitement usually reserved for long-lost friends returning home. "Commander," called Sergeant Val through the comm system, "are these some kind of biological weapons? They're not showing any aggressive behavior." Before Thane could answer, the German shepherd reached him and did something that froze the battle-hardened warrior in place. The dog sat down, head tilted to one side, and extended his right paw upward. His tail continued wagging, and a soft whine escaped his throat as if he was asking a question. Thane had never seen anything like it. In 30 years of combat across the galaxy, he had encountered creatures that spat acid, others that could phase through matter, and beings made of living energy. But he had never met anything that looked at him with such obvious hope and joy. The dog's brown eyes held no fear, no calculation, no hidden agenda, just pure, simple happiness at seeing another living being. "Sir," whispered Private Talk, the youngest member of the squad, "I think it wants something from you." The small white dog had approached Talk and was spinning in circles, yapping with excitement. Without thinking, Talk reached down with one massive hand. The dog immediately pressed against his palm, tail wagging even harder. Talk's expression behind his helmet changed from confusion to something resembling wonder. "It's warm," Talk said quietly, "and soft." Within an hour, the entire advance team had been surrounded by dozens of dogs of every size and color. They came from all directions, drawn by some invisible signal that seemed to say friendly beings had finally arrived. Large dogs, small dogs, dogs with long hair, and dogs with no hair at all. They brought sticks, old tennis balls, and rope toys, dropping them at the feet of confused Corvani warriors. Thane tried to maintain military discipline, but it became impossible when the German shepherd followed him everywhere he went. The dog had somehow decided that Thane was his new pack leader and refused to leave his side. When Thane stopped, the dog sat. When Thane moved, the dog heeled perfectly at his left side. When Thane tried to ignore him, the dog simply waited, patiently until Thane looked down, then wagged his tail as if to say, "I'm still here." The reports coming in from other landing sites around the planet told the same impossible story. In London, a pack of corgis had surrounded the 3rd Battalion and somehow convinced the warriors to sit down so the dogs could climb into their laps. In Tokyo, a massive St. Bernard had adopted Lieutenant Commander Zale and was following him around carrying a barrel that seemed to contain nothing but water and dog treats. The most disturbing report came from the Australian landing zone, where Sergeant Rex had discovered that a group of border collies had learned to operate the human food dispensers and were apparently distributing meals to other animals throughout the city. The dogs had organized themselves into what could only be described as a supply chain, making sure every creature in the area had food and water. "Sir," called Communications Officer Data, "the High Command is requesting an immediate status report on planetary subjugation progress." Thane looked down at the German shepherd, who had somehow acquired a tennis ball and was holding it hopefully in his mouth. The dog's entire body vibrated with excitement, and he kept glancing between Thane's face and the ball, clearly trying to communicate something important. "Tell High Command that we have encountered complications," Thane replied. "What kind of complications, sir?" Thane watched as Private Talk attempted to throw a stick for the white dog, who chased it with obvious joy before bringing it back and dropping it at Talk's feet. The young soldier's shoulders were shaking with what Thane realized was suppressed laughter, the kind we've never trained for, Data. As the day wore on, the strange situation became even stranger. The dogs seemed to understand that the Corvani were confused about their behavior. So they began demonstrating. They showed the warriors how to throw sticks and balls, how to give belly rubs, and how to scratch behind ears. A clever golden retriever named Buddy, according to his collar, actually managed to teach Sergeant Val the basics of fetch by repeatedly bringing him the same stick until Val finally threw it. The German shepherd stayed with Thane through the entire first day. When night fell and the Corvani made camp, the dog curled up next to Thane's sleeping area, as if protecting him from threats that didn't exist. Throughout the night, Thane could hear the soft sounds of dogs settling in around the camp, choosing sleeping spots next to the alien soldiers who had come to conquer their world. When morning came, Thane woke to find the German shepherd sitting beside his head, tail wagging, holding what appeared to be a carefully selected stick. The dog's message was clear. The day's activities would begin with play, followed by more play, with brief breaks for food and belly rubs. For the first time in his military career, Commander Thane found himself completely unprepared for the enemy he faced. An enemy that attacked with unconditional love, fought with unlimited forgiveness, and conquered through the simple act of being happy to see him every single day. The war for Earth had begun, but nobody seemed to have told the dogs that they were supposed to lose. 3 weeks after landing on Earth, Private Talk had completely forgotten what it felt like to wake up alone. The small white dog he had started calling Snow always managed to curl up against his chest during the night, despite weighing only 4 kilograms compared to his massive Corvani frame. Every morning began the same way, Snow's wet nose nudging his face, followed by excited spinning and the presentation of whatever treasure she had found during the night. Today's treasure was a bright red rubber ball that squeaked when pressed. Snow held it carefully in her mouth, her tail creating small dust clouds as it wagged against the floor of the makeshift barracks. Her dark button eyes held the same expression they carried every morning. Pure joy at the simple fact that Took was awake and ready to play. "You know we're supposed to be conquering this planet, right?" Tok whispered to her as he sat up on his sleeping mat. Snow dropped the ball and tilted her head to one side. Her ears perked forward, as if she was seriously considering his question. Then she picked up the ball again and pressed it against his hand, making it squeak. Her message was clear. Conquest could wait. The ball was more important right now. Across the camp, Commander Thane was experiencing his own morning routine with the German shepherd he had reluctantly named Rex. The large dog had claimed the space beside Thane's command station as his personal territory and spent most of his time there, watching everything with intelligent brown eyes. Rex had somehow figured out the daily schedule and always knew when it was time for patrol, meal breaks, or equipment maintenance. What worried Thane was how natural it felt. For 3 decades he had woken up alone in military barracks, focused only on the day's missions and objectives. Now he found himself looking forward to Rex's morning greeting, the way the dog's entire body wagged when he saw Thane's eyes open. It felt like betraying everything he had been trained to believe about warfare and discipline. "Sir," called Sergeant Val from across the camp, "the morning reports are ready." Val had her own companion now, a border collie with unusual markings around his eyes that made him look like he was wearing a mask. The dog, who answered to the name Scout according to his collar, had demonstrated remarkable intelligence over the past weeks. He had learned to recognize the different ranks among the Corvani by observing their behavior and interactions. When new soldiers arrived, Scout would greet them appropriately, enthusiastic tail wagging for the lower ranks, polite sitting for sergeants, and respectful distance for commanders until properly introduced. "What's the situation across the other landing zones?" Thane asked, trying to maintain his professional demeanor while Rex leaned against his leg. "Similar to ours, sir. The 3rd Battalion reports that productivity is down 40% because the soldiers keep stopping to play with their assigned animals. Lieutenant Commander Zale's unit has constructed what they're calling exercise areas for the local creatures. And Sergeant Major Grip has requisitioned engineering equipment to build what he terms comfort structures for the smaller animals." Thane closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. The Corvani military had never encountered a situation like this in their entire history. How do you conquer a planet when the inhabitants keep bringing you gifts and want nothing more than your attention and affection? The real problem was that it was working on them. Thane had noticed changes in his soldiers that went far beyond simple distraction. They smiled more often. They worked together more easily. The constant tension and aggression that defined Corvani military culture had begun to fade, replaced by something he didn't have words for in his own language. Private Talk exemplified the change. Before landing on Earth, he had been a typical young Corvani warrior, eager for combat, quick to anger, always trying to prove his strength to the older soldiers. Now he spent his free time teaching Snow new tricks and had become the unofficial caretaker for several other small dogs who had attached themselves to the unit. The angry young warrior had disappeared, replaced by someone who laughed out loud when Snow successfully learned to roll over on command. "Sir," called Data from the communication station. High Command is requesting immediate updates on territorial control and resource extraction operations. Thane looked around the camp. Territorial control was an interesting question when the territory's inhabitants kept bringing you tennis balls and wanting belly rubs. Resource extraction was equally complicated when you found yourself building better shelters for the creatures you were supposed to be displacing. Tell them we're conducting detailed reconnaissance of local conditions, Thane replied. Full report will follow when assessment is complete. What he didn't mention was that the assessment had revealed something troubling about his own people. The Corvani had built their civilization on strength, conquest, and military discipline. But watching his soldiers interact with Earth's dogs had shown him how much they had lost along the way. When had his people stopped laughing? When had they forgotten how to enjoy simple pleasures? When had showing affection become a sign of weakness? Rex seemed to sense Thane's troubled thoughts. The big dog moved closer and rested his head against Thane's armored leg. He didn't want anything. No food, no play, no attention. He was simply offering comfort, as if he understood that sometimes just knowing someone cared was enough. The moment was interrupted by a commotion from the eastern perimeter. Sergeant Major Grip's deep voice carried across the camp, but instead of his usual commanding tone, he sounded almost embarrassed. "Commander, you need to see this," called Sergeant Val, trying unsuccessfully to hide her amusement. Thane walked to the perimeter with Rex at his side, Scout following Val, and Snow bouncing along beside Talk. What they found defied every military protocol Thane had ever learned. Grip, the most feared warrior in the unit, was sitting on the ground surrounded by a litter of puppies. The massive Corvani soldier was approximately 4 times the size of the largest puppy, but they had clearly decided he belonged to them. They climbed over his legs, chewed on his armor straps, and took turns napping in his lap. One particularly bold puppy had managed to climb up to his shoulder and was now exploring his helmet with great interest. "Sir," Grip said, his voice carefully controlled. "These small units have established a defensive position around the supply depot. Standard protocols suggest removing them, but they appear to be providing effective pest control and perimeter awareness services." It was the most elaborate excuse for playing with puppies that Thane had ever heard from a senior officer. But looking at Grip's face, Thane saw something he had never seen there before: genuine happiness. The hard lines around the warrior's eyes had softened. His perpetual scowl had been replaced by an expression of wonder as one of the puppies fell asleep against his chest. "Maintain current position, Sergeant Major," Thane said formally. "Continue monitoring the situation." As they walked back toward the command station, Rex suddenly stopped and looked up at Thane with an expression that seemed almost knowing. The dog's tail wagged slowly, and he made a soft sound that wasn't quite a whine and wasn't quite a bark. It was almost as if he was saying, "You're beginning to understand." That night, as Thane lay on his sleeping mat with Rex curled up beside him, he realized the dog was right. He was beginning to understand something that had been missing from Corvani culture for generations. They had become so focused on being strong that they had forgotten how to be happy, so concerned with conquest that they had forgotten how to make friends. The humans might have fled this planet, but they had left behind the greatest teachers in the galaxy. And slowly, one belly rub at a time, those teachers were showing the Corvani what they had lost and how to find it again. Dr. Maya Collins stared at the surveillance footage for the 3rd time, convinced that the equipment was malfunctioning. The images coming from Earth's orbital monitoring stations showed something impossible: alien soldiers playing what appeared to be an organized game of fetch in Times Square. She watched a massive blue-gray warrior carefully throw a tennis ball, while a golden retriever bounded after it with obvious joy. "Run the diagnostic again," she told her assistant, Dr. Lee, who was operating the controls from their temporary laboratory on Mars Colony Beta. "I've run it 6 times, Maya. The equipment is working perfectly. This is really happening." Maya leaned back in her chair and rubbed her eyes. Around her, the emergency command center buzzed with activity as human leaders tried to make sense of reports that defied all logic. They had fled Earth expecting their home to be destroyed within days of the alien arrival. Instead, the planet appeared to be thriving under what could only be described as benevolent occupation. "Show me the Australian footage again," requested Admiral Kate Ross, the military leader of the human refugee fleet. The screen switched to a view of Sydney Harbor, where alien engineering teams were constructing elaborate structures that looked suspiciously like giant dog parks. Massive creatures worked alongside Earth's dogs, who supervised the construction with the serious attention of experienced project managers. One border collie appeared to be directing traffic, guiding alien vehicles with precise paw movements. "Are we absolutely certain these are the same aliens that forced us to evacuate?" asked President Walsh, her voice tight with disbelief. General Davis nodded grimly. "Ship signatures match perfectly. These are the same vessels that approached Earth in invasion formation, the same energy signatures we detected from their weapon systems, but their behavior—" He gestured helplessly at the screen. Maya switched to another camera feed, this one showing what used to be Central Park in New York City. Alien soldiers had constructed a massive obstacle course that dogs of all sizes were using enthusiastically. She watched a tiny chihuahua navigate a course clearly designed for much larger animals, while a patient alien soldier adjusted obstacles to help the small dog succeed. "Look at the technological applications," Dr. Lee pointed out, highlighting different aspects of the alien construction. "They're using advanced materials and energy systems, but for what? Automatic food dispensers, climate-controlled shelters, water purification systems for animals. They've turned our abandoned cities into paradise for pets." The observation struck Maya like a physical blow. The same aliens they had fled in terror were using technology beyond human understanding to care for the animals humans had been forced to abandon. The irony was almost too painful to process. "We need a reconnaissance mission," Admiral Ross declared. "We have to understand what's really happening down there." "Too dangerous," replied General Davis immediately. "We don't know their intentions. This could be some kind of elaborate trap." Maya found herself thinking about Charlie, her golden retriever, who was probably somewhere on that planet, possibly playing with the same alien soldiers they had feared would destroy everything. The guilt was overwhelming. They had made their decision based on military logic and survival instincts, but what if they had been wrong? Captain Roy Bennett's voice came through the communication system from the transport ship Mercury. "Admiral, I volunteer for the reconnaissance mission. I know Earth's geography better than anyone, and I have personal reasons for wanting to know what happened to the animals we left behind." Maya remembered Roy's face during the evacuation. The pain he couldn't hide every time they passed groups of abandoned dogs. If anyone deserved to know the truth about what had happened, it was him. "Approved," Admiral Ross said after a moment's consideration. "But minimal crew, maximum stealth. Get close enough to gather intelligence, but do not make contact unless absolutely necessary." 2 days later, Roy's stealth ship slipped through Earth's outer atmosphere, using advanced shielding to avoid detection by the alien fleet. The ship was small enough to appear as space debris on most sensor systems, but sophisticated enough to provide detailed surveillance of the planet's surface. What Roy saw through the ship's observation ports made him question everything he thought he knew about the invasion. The aliens hadn't destroyed human cities. They had improved them. Advanced technology had been integrated seamlessly with existing infrastructure, creating hybrid systems that served both form and function. Gardens flourished where concrete had once dominated. Clean water flowed through newly constructed channels. The air quality readings were better than they had been in decades. But it was the behavior of the aliens themselves that truly shocked him. Roy watched through telescopic lenses as massive warriors sat patiently, while tiny puppies climbed over them like living jungle gyms. He observed alien engineers consulting with border collies who appeared to be providing input on construction projects. He saw advanced alien vehicles modified with specially designed seating for dogs who rode along like trusted companions. "This isn't an invasion," Roy whispered to his co-pilot, Lieutenant Kate. "It's an adoption." The truth hit him with devastating clarity. Humanity had fled from beings who weren't conquerors at all. They had run away from potential friends, potential allies, potential family. The aliens had come to Earth seeking something, but it wasn't territory or resources. They had found what they were looking for in the unconditional love and loyalty of Earth's dogs. Roy made a decision that violated every order he had been given. He brought his ship down in a small clearing outside of New York City, in an area his sensors indicated was populated by both aliens and dogs. If he was wrong about their intentions, he was about to become the first human casualty of the war. If he was right, he was about to discover that humanity had made the greatest mistake in their history. As the ship powered down, Roy could see movement in the forest around them. Alien soldiers approached with weapons lowered, their body language more curious than threatening. But it was what followed them that made Roy's heart skip a beat. Dogs, dozens of them, representing breeds from around the world, and leading them was a German shepherd who looked remarkably familiar. The dog approached the ship with confident steps, his tail wagging with an enthusiasm that suggested he recognized something or someone important. "That's impossible," Roy breathed, checking the ship's external cameras. "That looks like..." The German shepherd sat down directly in front of the ship's main hatch, tilted his head to one side and barked once. It was a sound Roy had heard thousands of times during the evacuation, the bark of a dog who knew his human was nearby and wanted attention. Roy realized he was about to discover not just what the aliens intended for Earth, but what Earth's most loyal residents had been doing in humanity's absence. And judging from the welcoming committee outside his ship, the answer was going to change everything he thought he knew about loyalty, friendship, and what it really meant to be human. The German shepherd's bark was unmistakably joyful as Roy stepped out of his stealth ship. The massive alien warriors had stopped their advance, apparently waiting to see how this first meeting would unfold. Their weapons remained lowered, but Roy could see the tension in their postures. This was clearly not a situation they had trained for either. Then the German shepherd bounded forward with the kind of enthusiastic greeting reserved for family members returning from long trips. Roy knelt down as the big dog reached him, and his heart nearly stopped when he read the name tag, Max. He remembered Max from the Chicago evacuation zone, remembered the little girl who had cried as she was forced to leave him behind. "Hello, boy," Roy whispered, his voice rough with emotion as Max covered his face with enthusiastic licks. "I'm so sorry we left you." Max's response was immediate and clear. He pressed against Roy's chest, tail wagging so hard his entire body shook, then grabbed Roy's sleeve gently in his teeth and began tugging him toward the approaching aliens. The message was obvious. Max wanted to introduce his new friends to his old human. The lead alien was massive, nearly 3 meters tall with blue-gray skin marked by ritual scars. His armor was impressive and clearly designed for combat, but he moved with the careful patience of someone accustomed to being around much smaller, more fragile creatures. When Max led Roy within speaking distance, the alien soldier stopped and waited. "I am Commander Thane of the Corvani Dominion," the alien said through a translation device that rendered his deep voice into accented but understandable English. "You are the first human we have encountered since arriving on this world." Roy straightened to his full height, though he still had to crane his neck to look up at Thane's face. "Captain Roy Bennett, Human Colonial Transport Service. I was part of the evacuation fleet." "Evacuation?" Thane's head tilted slightly, reminiscent of Max's questioning gesture. "You abandoned this world voluntarily." The question hit Roy like a physical blow. "We detected your fleet approaching. Military formation, massive numbers, no communication attempts. We assumed you were here to invade." Something that might have been surprise flickered across Thane's alien features. "Invade? We came seeking refuge. Our homeworlds are dying. We had received signals from this system, not from your people, but from these creatures." He gestured toward Max, who was now sitting patiently between them like a furry diplomat. Signals that spoke of loyalty, companionship, unconditional acceptance. Roy felt the ground shift beneath his feet as he began to understand the magnitude of humanity's mistake. "You came here because of the dogs?" "We had lost something, Captain Bennett. My people became warriors out of necessity centuries ago. But in the process we forgot what it meant to have companions who chose to stay with us, not from fear or obligation, but from love. These creatures offered something we thought was extinct: In the galaxy, friendship without agenda. As if summoned by the conversation, more dogs began emerging from the surrounding forest. Roy recognized breeds from around the world: Labradors, Border Collies, tiny Chihuahuas, massive St. Bernards. They approached with the confidence of creatures who had learned that the scary-looking aliens were actually excellent belly rub providers and treat dispensers. "They've been teaching us," Thane continued, watching as a golden retriever presented Roy with a stick that had clearly been carefully selected for its throwing potential. Not just how to care for them, but how to care for each other. How to find joy in simple things, how to laugh. Roy threw the stick and the golden retriever bounded after it with pure happiness. Around them, Corvani soldiers were emerging from the forest, many accompanied by their own canine companions. Roy watched a massive warrior with a tiny corgi riding on his shoulder, the small dog surveying the meeting with the serious expression of a trusted advisor. "We thought you had fled because you feared us," Thane admitted. "It never occurred to us that you might have left these companions behind. When we realized what had happened, many of my soldiers wanted to find you and bring you back." "Bring us back?" Roy couldn't hide his surprise. Thane gestured toward the forest behind him. "Would you like to see what we have built together?" As they walked deeper into what had once been Central Park, Roy saw humanity's cities transformed into something he couldn't have imagined. Advanced alien technology had been seamlessly integrated with Earth's existing infrastructure, but the purpose wasn't conquest. It was care. Automated systems provided food and water for animals throughout the city. Climate-controlled shelters offered comfort during harsh weather. Medical stations staffed by alien technicians provided health care for any creature that needed it. "The dogs taught us how to organize it," Thane explained, watching as a border collie efficiently directed foot traffic around a construction site where aliens were building what appeared to be a massive playground. "They showed us which animals needed what kinds of care, where the best locations were for different activities, even how to modify our technology to serve their needs instead of our military objectives." Roy stopped walking when he saw the memorial. It was a massive structure constructed from materials he didn't recognize, covered with images of dogs and other animals. But it wasn't a monument to the pets left behind. It was a promise. Carved in both human languages and Corvani script were the words, "Until they return." "We never forgot that these creatures had families who loved them," Thane said quietly. "Everything we built was designed to care for them until you came back. We hoped you would come back." Roy felt tears he hadn't expected burning his eyes. "We thought you were going to destroy everything. Instead, they saved us," Thane replied. "My people had become so focused on survival that we had forgotten how to live. Your companions reminded us what we had lost and taught us how to find it again." Max had been listening to the entire conversation with the serious attention dogs brought to important human discussions. Now he approached Roy and sat down, then extended his paw in the same greeting he had offered to Thane on the first day. But this time he placed his other paw on Thane's armored leg, physically connecting the two beings he had claimed as his pack.